Buckle up, it's a heavenly race and we're in church today. See my look? Today call me Sister Pearl. Brother Kizito would approve. Sorry, I don't have a proper Bible in this house, but this should suffice because all my childhood religious trauma and Christian guilt started and ended with this book. Actually, specifically, see this bitch? Praise the Lord. See this woman? I did not want to be her. Okay, now specific to today's review or church today, this is the story we're going to be dealing with. Jonah and the big fish. Jonah is a prophet of Jehovah. It is not long after the death of the prophet Elisha that Jehovah tells Jonah, go to the great city of Nineveh. The badness of the people there is very great and I want you to speak to them about it, like have a tete-a-tete with them. But Jonah does not want to go. That's what they tell Brother Kizito to do. And what does this nigga do?
I'm a Ladika prophet.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to it. Today we're reviewing Half Heaven, a drama, and I would add faith-based drama currently streaming on Prime Video. I have 3 points of interest in this movie and in no particular order of importance. Here are my points. The first is that this is Cameroon's 2024 Oscar submission. The second is that this movie features our very own Chidi Mokeme. He didn't show up until far into the movie, and at that point I was starting to think like, did they make a mistake? But when he did show up, boy, was it worth the wait. And then the third and less significant, at least to most of Nigeria, is that I'm from Cross River State and we share borders with Cameroon. So we have some cultural similarities, and so that's nice. But the fact that we had to give up part of our state to them, that part was just annoying. Half Heaven. Half Heaven is written by Proxy Buh, I hope I'm saying the name right, directed by Enah, Johnscott. Hey, Edit Pearl here. While editing this video, just a couple hours ago, the AMVCA nominations list was announced, and the director of this movie, Enah Johnscott, has just been nominated in the Best Director category for this movie, Half Heaven. So I thought that was something to note here and say congratulations, wishing him the best. But he's not my winner because I've got my guys in that category as well, so good luck. For a synopsis, it says, a pastor sent to a deadly community to preach the gospel. He encounters a lot of challenges and overcomes it with the help of a prostitute. Very to the point. Let me just start by saying I hated this movie. I absolutely hated this movie. And then I fell in love with it. And then I fell in love with this movie. I felt so hard that by the time it was over, I wasn't ready for it to be over. And ladies and gentlemen, that is one of the things I look for in a movie. And that only happens when you feel like you're sufficiently immersed in the story, familiar with the characters, to where they start to feel like actual people to you that you're going to miss when it's over. And that's exactly how I felt by the end of this movie. Summary of plot. But before we get to the plot, let me just say, as usual, spoiler alert. I'm going to spoil this movie, so if you care about that sort of thing, just pause, go to Prime Video, watch this movie, and then come back and let's talk about it. Half Heaven is about a young man, Brother Kizito, played by Roland Seehoffer. He's very fervent, committed to ministry. His love of God and his walk of faith is completely without question. It's in everything that he does. This is the air I breathe. I keep singing and I know you guys want to kill me by now. I'm sorry, I'll stop. He finds himself up against, or should I say in an imaginary competition with, imaginary on the part of the pastor, with the pastor of their church in Victoria, Pastor Luma, who perceives Brother Kizito as a future threat for the leadership of the church. And so for the final step in Kizito's path to his pastoral ordination, which is his apostolic assignment, Pastor Luma sends him off to a very remote, very brutal, very lawless community of Mboko. Think Gotham, think Basin City in Sin City, think Shantytown, our own Shantytown, etc. And what is his mandate? To win one soul. On arriving in Mboko, he finds himself in a difficult situation that leads to his living with, or shall we say cohabiting with, a prostitute. 2 areas of conflict are immediately established. Kizito's external journey to becoming an ordained pastor, and then his internal journey of understanding soul winning from a place of love rather than from a place of preaching damnation and judgment.
Everyone can never be preaching love. I'm not a man of preach of love. I'm a war. I'm a fight. I'm in Gaboski.
And then his conflicts. First of all, his proximity to sin. What did we say? He's cohabiting with a sex worker or prostitute. So he has to live in a whorehouse and overcome the temptations of the flesh.
And then the Bible said, for the flesh lusts against the spirit.
That's number one. And then, and of course, it's a daily affront to his soul, because these women are not trying to be like fully dressed around him like Sister Pearl here or anything like that. And how this torments his very nature of being extremely judgmental and preachy and very like puritanical. As far as he's being very judgmental and preachy, one thing that Brother Kizito will tell you is that you are a worthless sinner bound for hell.
First of all, I want you to know that sin dwells in you.
Now, the second point of conflict for him is safety, which is he has to maneuver himself away from the threats of the vicious gangs operating in Mboko. But Akizito goes about his mission as best as he can until he catches the eye, or should we say the ire of the gang. But this is quickly dispelled when his benefactor steps up and she stands up for him. He does his best to win souls, coming close a series of times. He has some near successes. Despite all of these external obstacles, Kizito's greatest obstacle remains himself, his judgmental outlook and perspective. What he needs is to redefine his purpose and faith and the principles of love over judgment. This movie features themes of love, morality, spirituality, community, and compassion. Now, before we begin, let me just remind you to please hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Please also like this video and share. Would you share? Thank you. Also, tell me if you watch movies from other African countries. I know that we watch a lot of like soaps and series from South Africa, but how about movies specifically and from other African countries, and how do you feel, especially as it compares with our own Nollywood movies or any movies from the Nigerian industry? So talk to me in the comments. Now let's get straight to it. What worked? Cast and then their performances. Now, there was no particularly like standout bad actors, but let me just say that the lead performances were especially strong and natural. Syndy, who played Bisona, that's the prostitute, she gave such a credible performance as a really likable, pragmatic sex worker with a heart of gold. I loved her. Roland Seehoffer as Brother Kizito, he was so great that I came from absolutely hating this character in the beginning of the movie to absolutely loving him by the end of the movie. That's how you know when somebody does their job so well that you hate them so well, and for him to be able, him and the story to be able to transition me from hating the character to loving the character, that was quite a feat. And then there's our own Chidi Mokeme. I have a Cameroonian friend and I asked him, have you seen this movie Half Heaven? And he spent 0.00 seconds saying yes, and the rest of the time, 10 minutes or more, was just to sing the praises of Chidi Mokeme unprovoked. Like, I just asked him, have you watched the movie? And he was like, oh my god, you guys, Chidi Mokeme was so amazing. And then he goes on to rave about how Chidi nailed the accents, the slangs, all of it. And that was so great to hear, because I couldn't tell, but it was good to actually hear from someone from the culture saying, oh, he killed it, so I love that. But also Chidi Mokeme as an actor just has so much presence, and he's always very enjoyable to watch on screen. Well, for the most part. You guys know the movie not very long ago. Okay, character development. The characters in this movie were very well developed. They were three-dimensional characters with enough backstory and background information to establish them as, real people. So I didn't feel at any point that I knew too little or too much about any particular character. So I thought that was done well. The story, the hero's journey, including his goals, stakes, the conflicts, and how he changes very organically through the course of the story. These were all very clear. The structure of the movie was also very well done. For the most part, I did have a specific point that I deeply disagreed with, and I'll speak to that when I get there. The story itself, encompassing plot events, was sketched very credibly from start to finish in a way that was so immersive. It was just a well-told story with clearly defined arcs. Throughout this movie, I didn't feel that any scenes were wasted. This movie used humor to great effect wherever necessary, and this movie passed the litmus test for faith-based. You guys know know that I've had issues with faith-based movies recently. There was also such a great depiction of sex workers in their natural habitats without fetishization or tokenization of these sex workers. They were just like real people living their authentic lives. They were funny and they were likable in the extreme. Now, establishing that there was no phone network coverage in Mboko helped heighten the sense of imminent danger for Kizito. Dialogue was realistic and subtle. There was nothing overboard, on the nose, or just over the top. There was no melodrama that I could see, so I thought that all these things were done well. I enjoyed the ambiguous nature of the love story. Whether or not there should have been a love story or if this relationship should have transitioned into a love story is another conversation entirely. I also enjoyed the lack of a proper resolution with several story threads. I feel that this movie ended when and exactly as it needed to end. And when I tell you that just the way it ended as far as the love story, my heart, I did not want it to end. So I fell in love with them as a unit. Kizito and Bosito, or Bonita, whatever her name was. Sorry, I don't remember right now. It's been weeks since I watched this movie. Now, not seeing Kizito back in Victoria, like not seeing him go back and report and whatever I want souls or whatever, how it all ended, it was a clear indication to what Kizito's real journey was, which was not becoming a pastor, but rather becoming a true evangelist who preached love. So whether or not he was ordained, whether it just in the end, it did not matter, because he thought that what he wanted was to become a pastor, but what he really needed was to become a true evangelist preaching love.
I'm not a man of preach of love.
All right, so the movie really understood that, and I was so with that. I like that the movie answered all the questions that I had the flaring up at different points. Example, when the thugs came in the beginning, sort of, and then they backed off based on Kizito's babe telling them to back off. I was like, who the hell is she? But then it made sense later when Chidi Mokeme's character, Tita, that was his name, when he showed up. The flashbacks that tormented him at different points throughout the movie, it came up all to a climax that made sense. Another thing that this movie did very well was sustain suspense throughout the movie by creating several layers of conflict. As far as the technical elements, nothing stood out as offensive, so I'll just say it was adequate. The lighting, the sound, actually I think at some point the sound annoyed me just in some parts, but again, when a story is good, unless other things like are glaringly bad, it really would not bother me that much, because for me the story will always be king. Costume also I think was just adequate. Everything was just inoffensive as far as the technical and production design elements. The final thing I'm going to say, which is probably one of my favorite things about this movie, is that for a movie that was all about preaching, there was such a lack of preachiness or didacticism. You know, they weren't trying to like hit you over the head, but you got the message loud and clear. So you know the best part? I didn't have to struggle with any of this. I didn't have to struggle. You don't know how many times I have to struggle sometimes when I look at my pros versus cons and I'm like, no, please try. So I start mentioning unnecessary things just to try to tip the balance one way. But this movie, it was so easy because there were so many things that were just so good about the movie as a whole and about the story. But it was far from perfect. So what did not work? Just as with the what worked section, my focus here is also again going to mainly be the story. It's usually in the small details, right? So that's where our emphasis is going to be. The devil is in the detail. Now the story. Some aspects of story did not work. Like, it was hard for me to like really get with Kizito's mission, for me to care enough about his external journey of, you know, his mission to Mboko, knowing fully well that Kizito himself did not in fact believe that God had anything to do with this mission, right? So you could argue that he went along with it in furtherance of his goal of becoming an ordained pastor, but he did express a categorical belief that God had sent him to Mboko. So that was kind of a point of conflict for me, and it just made it hard for me to really engage with the whole soul winning thing. Now, as far as Pastor Luma, I'm not sure if he thought it would be impossible to win a soul or if his real goal was for Kizito to get killed in Mboko. It would have been nice if there had been a bit of like a backstory or a montage on other pastors or evangelists or missionaries who had attempted a similar undertaking in Mboko. So that way we would have seen like clearly what kind of danger, because as it is, the danger that was Mboko did not seem specific to Kizito. Because yes, Mboko is dangerous, but normal people live there, you know, and it seemed like the danger was mostly among warring parties. So it didn't really seem like it would be specifically dangerous for him, even though it was a dangerous community, because again, regular people live there. I have said that I liked that they established that there was no phone network connection, whatever, but it did raise the question of how Kizito was going to report his success and prove to Pastor Luma that he did actually save a soul. If that had happened, how would that have worked out? Now, Kizito showing up at a nightclub when he first arrived, that was his first point of call. That made him look a bit silly, and one thing you don't want is for your protagonist to look silly. So, and it also felt kind of forced to the storyline of him living or cohabiting with these sex workers. Setting a time frame for the assignment, I think he was given 1 month. It did something great, which was that it created a ticking clock. That's always a great thing to do. So you're asking me why then is it in the what did not work section? That's because they ruined it by extending it. He extended by 1 week. Your ticking clock has to be inflexible. In a movie, the contract between the audience and the writer or the storyteller is when we say that a bomb is going to go off in 20 minutes, you have to know for a fact that this bomb is either going to be diffused or is going to go off in 20 minutes. If, however, imagine that the clock turned and started counting again, you've ruined it, you know. So here, the ticking clock was the one at the expiration of that 1 month, he had failed, it should have been over. Instead, when he extended by, it just took away from the immutability of the ticking clock, and that ruined that for that. Why was his girlfriend always watching news about Mboko like so obsessively? So that felt to me like it was very obvious foreshadowing about his being sent there. Now, the flashbacks were good, but they kind of did not have there was no method to them. They just kind of popped up whenever, not really connected to real-time events. If anything, I think that they should have gotten more intense when he got to, or more frequent when he got to Mboko, right? Almost like his subconscious recognizing the place. But as it was just popping up whenever. The pastor, that's Pastor Luma, he was so blatantly a villain, you know, that he weakened the other characters because their engaging with him as their spiritual lead and authority made them seem gullible, meaning Kizito specifically, and even also Pastor Luma's wife. So I didn't like that they made him so obviously a villain and obviously unscrupulous. The criminality in Mboko seemed almost like cartoonish in its criminality. I know I've likened it to all the Sin City, Shantytown, but to be honest with you, the crime there did not actually seem that impressive, you know. It just felt like very low grade, and so that made it hard to understand why it had the kind of reputation, because it just seemed like the kind of nonsense that could very easily be squashed. Those guys were just playing at being gangsters, let's be real. So it didn't seem like it earned the reputation that it had, and yet on the other hand, it seemed like the whole country was so focused on reporting news coverage about Mboko, but Mboko, when you get there, it wasn't actually that big of a deal. It was just a bunch of gangs just fighting each other or whatever, you know, for supremacy, and then sort of obtaining from poorer people. But it didn't seem that threatening of an environment, to be honest. My biggest issue in this movie by far was actually a problem with structure, as I had mentioned before, with one particular plot point. Now, Master Exodus, guy who died just before he made his confessional prayer, I did not like that Kizito was not allowed to deal with the real crisis of choice in offering salvation to the person who murdered his family and disrupted his life. Here is this man standing before him, asking him to basically give him his passage to heaven. That would have been by far the strongest conflict in this movie, because he has an opportunity to play God. How would he have chosen? But they denied the story that. I thought that it really weakened the plot in that way, because, I mean, big question, do I offer salvation and absolution to this man, or do I let him die and go to hell? You know, and that would have been a real test of who he is and a real turning point for his journey. So all that was left for him at the end was just the knowledge that, you know, this was the guy that, you know, who killed my family, but it wasn't interesting. And then to make matters even worse, he wasn't even given any opportunity to explore his feelings around helping the person who wiped out his family essentially into heaven. He didn't even have any time towards the end of the movie to even deal with those those feelings. So I thought that was such a huge wasted opportunity, that whole storyline. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say, first of all, I'm going to use this movie to make a point, which is that I've recently reviewed two similarly positioned, that's faith-based Nollywood movies, and a lot of people thought that what I had issues with was the whole faith-based thing, when what I really had issues with was that these were just movies that were simply not well made. If anything, this movie was so much more in-depth and triggering to my anti-religion that you would think that this is the movie that I would absolutely hate, and yet I'm in love with this movie. And that's because the subject matter was handled respectfully and consensuously, and that's what I always say. This is how you know when a film is made by people that actually care, not just about making films in general, but about a particular subject matter, versus when ideas are tacked on as either marketing gimmicks or to impose moral lessons onto the story. From a purely storytelling perspective, religion, as with any other magical or fantastical story world, and I'm saying this within the context of what I'm saying, not as a way to disrespect or take away from religion as a system. So let me go back. Religion, as with any other magical or fantastical story world, whether mythological or science fiction, it operates within a set of rules, right? The world operates within a set of rules, and when you don't adhere to those rules, you make a bad product. It's not about whether I care about religion or not. It's about if you adhere to the rules of that genre, of that theme, of that world. That's why our faith-based movies are not faith-basing, okay? Now, I do have a question about the end of this movie. I've said that I appreciated the ambiguous or open-ended ending of this movie, but do you think that this was perhaps a cop-out? Because are you able to truly picture a man like Kizito with a woman that has been, in the words of the character, I would say, used by so many men, even in his presence? So I feel like that could have been a cop-out, like leaving it the way it was and not really going forward and taking the love story to a conclusion. Again, I cannot say enough that I liked how it ended. I liked how it ended both with the love story and with his external journey about soul winning and becoming a pastor. I was fine. But was it a cop-out? I highly recommend this movie. It was a slow burn, but then it reeled me in slowly, and by the end, I was so unequivocally hooked. I can't even tell you enough how much I liked this movie. I'm an atheist, and yet I can't tell you how much I wanted Kizito to win a soul. I mean, obviously, I don't want anybody to win any souls, but as far as this movie, I really wanted Kizito to win a soul. Interpretation: when you care about a character, you care about what they care about. You want them to have what they're pursuing in the movie, and that's what I was invested in this character's journey, and that's how I know that this was a well done story. And guys, that's it for Half Heaven. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed or liked, would you please and share? Did you see my marquee? Do you like it? I like it. I made it by hand and I like it. I like it. Also, please tell me about other African movies from other African countries. The main focus of this channel is Nollywood, obviously, if for no other reason than the fact that I'm Nigerian, but also because, God, the volume of Nollywood movies, but still from time to time, I would like us to dip our toes in other waters. What do I tell you? You have the right to an incredible viewing experience, so never settle. And now Sister Pearl is off to film another review, and guys, I've got to go beat my face, okay? So, church dismissed.